Hello, I'm John Cole Morgan and welcome to us this morning. This is Sewing Street and I am so excited. We are doing our sashings and borders section of our block of the week. Now some of you may not have seen our block of the week before, so let me tell you what it is. You can take part now because all of the fabrics that you see on the three beautiful quilts behind me are exclusive to Sewing Street. We've got this gorgeous grey and pink and green combination. We've got the beautiful brights combination here, which I adore. And then we've got, of course, our fabulous blue collection over here. And all of these are available on our website. We've got a big bundle for you of everything, and we've got our sashings and borders. But let me show you what we're getting in each one of these each one of the quilts, that you can see each and every single block in here as well. So before we get to that, each week we have had a different aspect of the quilt. So we're at the very last week, week 13, so you're getting the set of instructions to do all the sashings and the borders. And what I love is, now if we've got some savvy shoppers out there, everybody's been asking, are we going to do the fabric on its own? And we're not, but look at the size of this panel. It's vast. I think it's 140 centimetres one way and 135 centimetres the other. It is huge, but borders, we've got a lot of sashing. So each one of these panels, each one of these borders and sashing panels are roughly 2.5, 3 times what you were getting on the normal week blocks that you were using before. And so many of you have got so much fabric left over as well. But this is the final installment that you need to finish off this quilt. And I've just realized I've covered up the code that I need to give. Perfect. Sorry about that. This is the vintage colorway that I've just shown you there. So the sashing and borders. So if you are following us every week, this is the last section that you need. Getting so many of you involved in this, which I've loved. Because when we started lockdown, everybody was a bit, and we're all a bit like, oh, what's going on? But we wanted something that we could all do together as a community. Because I think as a community, we always work so much better when we've got a communal goal and we can share our blocks and share our experiences and any questions and problems you've had. You very kindly pop them on the fans page, and I've been able to answer the question either at the time, or I've taken your question and brought it on to explain in the block of the week or the following week, which has been great, because some of the questions that you've had I hadn't even thought of, which is great to have that feedback. And the great thing about our YouTube page is every single one of our videos, each week you've had more than an hour usually of every single block being able to be made. You can see that you've got all the different blocks made as you go. And each and every single one of the blocks each week is available on our page, and they're separated out as a page. And as far as I know, I think the amazing Hayley B has actually separated them, and there's a section in the YouTube page that says block of the week, and all 13 of the videos are on there. So what now? Perfect. So we've shown you the vintage one because the vintage has been the most popular of all of our colours. This one is our, this is brights. This is brights. So the quilt we've got behind me here, it's the brights colourway there. So again, you're going to get this wonderful set of instructions with very clear instructions of how you actually do everything. And then you're getting this amazing panel. And let me show you just how huge this panel is. Look how much fabric you're getting. It is so huge. So you're getting 3 different colors in this because you've got your cornerstones, which in this one is your fabric 2. And then you've got your fabric 1 and you've got your fabric 4. So you don't have any fabric 3 because you don't need it for the sashings and the borders. So everything you need for your sashings and your borders is all in this one panel. But as you can see, the panel is vast. There is so much fabric in this panel compared to what you were getting in your normal weekly panels. So you definitely will have more than enough there. Now, most of you have already come to the end of your quilt, and I hear that you're all already checking out on your sashings and bindings, which I'm loving because it's such a fun project. And it's nice to get to that end bit where you can actually then just put everything together and get it finished up. And then very last, but certainly not least, we've got our blue colorway, which is this quilt over here. Again, you're getting a wonderful set of instructions. If I held it the right way round, that would be really handy. Getting our fabric, the pattern here, but then the bundle as well. And again, such a huge amount Such a huge amount of fabric here as well. You can't even see me, there's so much. So it's as wide, almost as wide as it is long, 140 centimeters wide, and I think it's 140 centimeters wide and 135 long. I know the 135 is right, but you can see such a huge amount of fabric. Whoops. I don't know how I'm supposed to fold these big bits. I struggle with fat quarters. There we go. Now, if you're just joining us today and you haven't taken part on the block of the week before and you'd like to, you'll be able to go on the website and you'll be able to get each and every single one of those blocks in the colorway you like available. But let me first show you what each of the blocks look like. We're going to start. Now remember, if you did get the bundle, this is blocks 1 to 12 in the bundle. You will need to get the sashings and borders as well, otherwise you won't be able to finish. So next we're going to show you all the blocks that we've got for the vintage colorway here. Now I think some of these are going to be out of order, but I'm just going to show you exactly which ones you're getting. So we're going to look at them. Because what we wanted to do was to be able to show you different skills and different techniques to be able to get you to improve in your quilting journey, to be able to get your scant 1/4 inch improved, to get your half square triangles. Well, if you can't do half square triangles at the end of this, then there's no hope. But it's just been such a fun project to be able to take part, to be able to be involved with. And so many of you, hundreds of you have joined in every week. It's been fabulous to be able to see each and every finished block. It's been so good. And I think this was our first block that we did. And then our last block, I'm not sure which one our last block was, but we've just built our skills up through the weeks going all the way through. So this is the vintage colorway here. And all 12 of the blocks that we did in our quilt are all going to be available in that wonderful bundle. And each week you've got the set of instructions as well as the panel. And then obviously don't forget we've got our YouTube tutorial of each one as well. So, and that will make this quilt here, when it's completely finished, take the set apart completely, and you can see it's such a beautiful, beautiful quilt. So many different blocks available. Maybe sometimes you can't really see it. We'll go, there we go, that's much easier. And you can see all the blocks in there. There they are numbered for you. So you can see the top left-hand corner is number 1, 2 beneath that's number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then the one that doesn't have a number is our block 12. But you can just see how your skills would have grown all the way through, going through that different process. It's been brilliant. I absolutely loved taking part in that. It was blue, yeah, just checking. And then we can see all the different colours that we've got in our blue colourway. So that was, I know, block 2, but after that I'm going to stop because I can't remember which block was which one. But look at this, but you're making all 12 of them, and each one goes and you build your skills up each week, getting all the different blocks together. It's just such a lovely way of being able to expand your knowledge, learn together with other people, be able to see all the blocks that everybody's made. And what I've loved is some people have taken it and put their own little twist on them and done them ever so slightly differently as well, which I love, because you've got that wonderful input of people doing things the way they think would be best. And I love the fact that people can do that. And then you come down to slightly more complicated blocks like number 12 here. Isn't that just fabulous? Such a lovely block that. So we can have a look then and see the blues quilt over here. Oh, we got it on the wonderful. Look at that. And you can see all the different blocks again, and they look so different in every colorway, don't they? I'm still tempted to actually buy a few of the different colors in the different, all 3 colorways, and to be able to make a whole mix match quilt, being able to get them all looking different and doing each block differently. And number 3, you can see number 3, you've got that secondary circular pattern using the dark dots, which I was hoping to get right. So, and then last but certainly not least, we've got our Brights colorway as well. This one has been very popular too. We've got all the different blocks available of these. And you can just tell they all look so different. And you can see all these different blocks coming through here. You can just see all these gorgeous different ways of doing it. And when I mentioned about the secondary pattern in the block there, you've got the darks forming a little circle on there. I tried to make sure my little eye of detail was keeping you all entertained through the whole process. Oh, I've just found the missing vintage blocks I was looking for a few seconds ago. And then that was number 12 then. So this is in the other bundle over there for the vintage, because I was literally looking for those a few minutes ago, going around going, oh, where are my blocks? So that was the vintage colour, the Brights colourway, and you can see that this is the Brights quilt over here. If I stand over here. Such a lovely colourway. Now I know this is the final week and a lot of you are just joining us. So this is now going to be our sashings and sashings and border quilt. So I'm going to show you what we're actually making. What is a sashing? What is a border? What are we doing? So you'll see over here, let me find that very block. Oh, that was very well placed. So we've now all made our block here. So you can see that's our block here. And then we're asking you now, well, I hear people asking, what is the sashing and what is the border? So the sashing is the bits that go around each of your block to be able to get the center section right. And then the border is this dark border around the outside. So that is what we're going to be doing now. Now, before we get to that point, let me show you. So the most, oops, sorry. Oh, well. Me throw things around the set? Never. Now, every single one of you have got blocks that are different sizes. The first thing I want you to do is do not beat yourself up if your block's not exactly 15.5 inches. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, and I promise you it really doesn't, because I'm going to show you a few tricks on how I have found that it makes your life a little easier. The very first thing is that I need you to do is to take every single one of your blocks and measure them. Measure the height, measure the width, the length and breadth, height, width. Measure the two sizes, however you want to call it, measure it out. Work out exactly how big all of your blocks are. Then get a piece of paper and write down, put them in order. So ideally, this is the way that I suggest you put the quilt. But let's say you've got 3 blocks that are 15 inches, and then you've got 3 blocks that are 15.25, and 3 blocks that are 15.5, and then you've got 3 blocks that are 15.75. So what you're going to do, 1/4 of an inch is not difficult to lose on a quilt of this size, because as you're going down, you can easily lose that. So what I'm suggesting is there are 2 or 3 ways of doing this. You can either create little sections and rows of 3 blocks that measure the same. And that way then you can put them all together. The sashing this way will be slightly smaller because this will be the height of your finished blocks. So if you've got 3 blocks exactly the same height, all you do is you go and you cut your sashing the same height as the block. And then the difficulty comes in on this section here, but we'll get to that. So we'll go across first. So if you've got these at, say, 15.25, you will cut your sashing strips at 15.25, and you would then sew these to the edge. And that is steps, sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head. You are looking at steps 1 to 5. You would do steps 1 to 5 with your side sashings being 15.25. If you're at 15.5, fantastic. So there are many ways of doing it. That's one way, is that you separate your sections like that. The other way is, 2 seconds. Please don't fall off. Nope, you're going to fall off. There we go. The other way of doing it is you just trim it down. Now that is easy to do when you haven't got points. So let's look at this one. This is the most complicated block, and my complicated block, this came in, so this is a really perfect example. It's 15.5 this way and 15.25 that way. So it's not square. Now, most people's blocks aren't square. Now, the first thing I'm going to tell you to do, without being critical to yourself, because you need to be kinder to yourself as a quilter, is turn the block over. and have a look and see why you are out. It's important to learn from this process. So you need to take a ruler. Do we have a ruler? Oh, there we go, got one. And what I want you to do is I want you to measure each one of your triangles. Measure what the finished size is. Once you've got, oh, where am I going with my ruler? There we go. So measure what your finished size is. Check that back to the patterns. See where you've gone wrong. Turn your block over. Now you can see over here, my seams there, that one is a lot thicker than that one. So that's going to play a role into why my quilt is a different, my block is a different size. Now, the important thing with this is that this is a learning tool. You need everything that you do. If you look at your very first block to your very last block, and that's a block. That is not messing around. That is a really serious block. Going around and checking where you've gone wrong means when you do the block again or you do another block, you just pay a little bit more attention to the area where it perhaps hasn't worked out quite as well. But be kind to yourself. It doesn't matter. No one has ever given a quilt back that you've made for them and said, oh, that point doesn't match, I don't want it. Because they look at your quilt and they say, my goodness, that's made with such love and such care. And if they don't, they're ungrateful and send me the quilt. I will love it. But it's just, you've got to just know where you've gone wrong. And when you've gone right, make sure that you give yourself a little pat on the back. And when you've gone wrong, make sure you give yourself a little pat on the back because you tried. You did it and you tried. So over here, I can see that my 1/4 inch is completely out on this blue piece of fabric over here. It's dreadful. It's more than an 1/8 of an inch, but less than 1/4. You can see that's my 1/4 inch seam there. But if I look on my pink section, that is perfect. So I have half a biscuit for that one. But then when I look at this one over here, that seam's not even going to hold with this yellow. That was just online telly at its best. Look, I'm 1/4 of an inch there, but look at that. Now, we all do it. We all get to that point, and that's okay. So you've got options. You have got so much fabric left over from all of your blocks because that is just the way we designed it, that you would have fabric left over, that if you do have a block, let's say you measure everything and they all measure 15 1/4, but one block measures 14.75. Redo the block that's 14.75. That is the only thing that I would suggest, is that everything is uniform bar one, maybe 2 blocks. Why don't you remake those 2 blocks and look where you went wrong first? And there's no criticism in it. It's learning, and I don't want people beating themselves up about it. It's been I've just been sad to read that people have been so upset that they've got their blocks wrong. You've tried. Do you know how many people who haven't even tried, and you've done it? And just because it doesn't measure 15 1/4 doesn't mean it's not beautiful. It's just not the right size per the pattern. That doesn't mean it's not the right size and it's not beautiful. So go and measure all of your blocks. See where you are. If they all measure within 15 1/4 and 15 1/2, you're absolutely fine. Don't worry about it. If you've got one block that's considerably smaller, go back and redo that block perhaps, if you want to. Otherwise, you add a wider sashing at that point. Or if your blocks are much bigger, you add a smaller sashing at that point. No one's going to be upset about it. And once you've quilted it, no one's going to know. So there we go. That's my little lecture over on why you could have potentially gone wrong. So what I'm going to do is I'm doing this in vintage. Perfect. Right, where is my rotary cutter? Because I've been very organised this morning. There we go. That is the longest ruler. Right, so the very first thing you're going to do is you're going to cut up your fabric. Now, there are various ways that you can do this. There is no right or wrong. You do it how you like. I've seen people cut these by hand. I've seen people cut these with rotary cutter. I usually have a longer ruler, but we'll do this one for now. Either. Whoops. Sorry, you don't need to see the top of my head, but I'm at that angle that you can't really get to cut it if you're not right up close and personal. Now what we've done very cleverly here is that we've got our fabric 4 just above what the actual fabric is. The reason we did that is because we wanted you to have as much fabric as humanly possible And that way then you'll be able to get that little bit of extra fabric out from the whole process, which I was very pleased they could do it. But by this stage of the game, you know what your fabric 4 looks like, you know what your fabric 1 looks like, and you know what your fabric 2 looks like. It just makes your life that little bit easier, not having a little bit of fabric taken away by the numbering on there. And of course, our vintage colorways, of course, in the lead. But I have to say, the thing that I have loved most and that I was most proud about, and I actually did shed a little tear, was actually having my name on selvage. That's just such a grown-up thing to have. It's only those very clever people like Davy Shaw that have things like that. But I got it too. I'm very excited. So it's just something really silly like that that thrilled me no end. Now, what I do is I separate my fabric out. Oh, somebody's covered this in glue. Oh God, there's loads of glue on this. Who did that? Yeah. Now, when you are cutting this, I would say to you, when you get to the end over here, do not slice through your white. Leave that as one piece. Reason being is that we have graphed this very, very carefully to make sure that you can get the most efficient use of your fabric as possible. So you can see I've just got to the end there and I've not cut past it. And then I'm just going to separate my fabric 4 out completely. Oh, helps if I get this right. Because I like separating my fabrics first to make sure I know what's what. Oh. Right, so now you've got this really odd shape of fabric number 1, which is quite normal. That's what you're expecting. So I'm going to trim this off very quickly and just say to you, so what you're going to do now is you've got 4 border pieces to cut out of fabric 4. So if you have a little bit of white like that into your fabric, it does not matter. As long as you're not within a 1/4 of an inch seam, that'll be hidden in the seam allowance, so don't worry. So what you're going to do now is you've got this wonderful big piece of black fabric. This is now my fabric 4, I think it was. It'll be on the top of my selvage. Yes, fabric 4. So what you're going to do now is you're going to cut these into the strips that you need all the way down. Join them together and put your border strips together. You will have multiple joins in them. It doesn't matter. It's patchwork. The whole concept of patchwork is having pieces put together. So that is the piece of border that you're going to do. You literally just cut this into strips, the width that per the pattern, sew them together end to end, and then once you finish the sashing section, you'll put them down the side, and then you'll put them at the top and the bottom. So it's Now I have done, for myself, and the way that I've written the pattern is I have started the sides first. For me, I prefer to do the sides first and then the tops. That's what the measurements are as well. It just makes life a little bit easier. You can do it the other way around if you like, but then you're going to need to make your sides longer and then the top shorter. But it doesn't really matter one way or the other, but I prefer to do the sides first and then the top. And it's very interesting because there are different rules there are all these rules, and I never know what they are, but there are all these descriptions on the best way of being able to do borders and when a finished quilt, what's best to look at. And for me, it's a case of I've got a clean line at the bottom and a clean line at the top. I always think that makes your quilt look better and it looks wider and all that silliness. So next we are now down to our pink fabric. Now our pink fabric here is fabric 2. So what you're going to do for your fabric 2, come on. So this will be yellow on the brights. I'm going to have to just, I can't. Forgive my head being in your shot then, but you try and get the, oh my goodness, that was a bit silly of me. You can see I've just cut a huge chunk, not a huge chunk, but a little chunk out of my white fabric. We'll all do it, it doesn't matter. Oh my goodness, I really think we'd make quite a lot of money if we actually just put the talk back that goes on in the ears on the thing here. I literally, for the last 2-3 seconds, I've been doubled over on the actual set, laughing by what is being said in my ear. Sorry. Right, moving back onto this. Back in the room, back in the room. So I'm just trimming off this here. And then, there we go. There we go. So when you've got your fabric 2 cut out, now your fabric 2 are the cornerstones between your sashing. So again, that is all listed in the pattern what size you've got to cut this to, and you'll cut that into a big strip. But also, if you're a savvy quilter like I am, you actually don't need to cut all of it. You've got quite a lot of this fabric left over. So I would start on one end and go to the other and cut off what you need as you go. And all you're doing is once you've got your sashing. Now on this one, we obviously had to put fabric 2 in it. So you just trim that little bit off there. And then all I do now is whatever the width is in the pattern, you will then go and you will cut your sashing strips out of this. Now, if you have decided that you have got different blocks and different sizes all the way along, for your row 1, if you've decided that your blocks are, say, 15 inches, I would still keep your cornerstones the same width. What you would need to do is on the sides, you would then keep your heights different. But what I would try and do is keep the sashing strips from here to here, try and keep those as close to 15.5 as you can, and then get these to the width that they need to be. The reason is if you've got this bit being slightly narrower, that's fine. But if you've got them going this way, if you cut this to say 14.5, at the bottom of the quilt they're 15.75, your quilt isn't automatically going to look a bit funny going like that. So what I would say to you is that you need to just then very easily, if you are going to change the width on it, I would add an extra 1/4 inch on here than the size of your block, and then just ease that in as I show you how to do that later. But always keep your cornerstones the same size and the same height per the pattern if you can, and the width of your sashing strips the same. It's just going to make your life a lot easier. So the borders I've explained, the cornerstones I've explained, so that's the fabric, and you're going to have loads left over as well, so don't worry about that. And it's still, don't forget, you've got your 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you, you're actually just going to use a, sorry? What was it? Oh, yeah. So it's the 1/4 inch is quite normal. exactly what you would do. We've spoken very briefly about scant 1/4 inches, well, not very briefly, but quite extensively over the 12 weeks, the scant 1/4 inch. It might be easier for you to do a scant 1/4 inch all the way. That's absolutely fine. Just do what is comfortable for you and see, once you've done your first row, how everything's lying, and then you'll be fine on that. Right, so we've now separated our 3 fabrics and we're all ready to go. The sashing is now where we become a little bit of a, not a problem, but we just take a little bit of time to work out. Now, I'm not going to cut these to the width per the pattern. That will be available in the pattern. I'm going to cut these as 3 inches. I'm going to do it over there. I'm going to just cut them this way. The width isn't important. What is important is the length of it. So I'm just going to actually do this the other way. So I am going to trim this little section off. Just check the height of it. Keep losing my pattern. Yes, that's right. So you can actually cut this bit off, that's not a problem, sorry. Didn't read the pattern properly. Right, so we are wanting a whole load of 15.5 inch strips. So I'm going to cut these. This is not the size per the pattern. The pattern will tell you what size you need to cut these widthwise. I'm going to cut these at 3 inches. That's the wrong way round. So I'm cutting a full strip of 3 inches all the way along here. And then I'm going to break that down into my 15.5 inch pieces. Okay, so remember that is not the size that you need to cut it for the pattern. The width of the width of the sashing is in the pattern, so you can double check that when you get your pattern. So don't follow these instructions when you're making the quilt, because they will be wrong and you won't have enough fabric if you do a 3 inch piece. Right, so I now am going to square up this edge because that's not really very square. And the easiest way I know how to cut a 15.5 inch strip is taking my ruler, lining 15.5 inches up there, lining my ruler up against the top, checking that's the width that it's meant to be, and this is not the width it's meant to be. And there we go. Right, so these are 15.5 inches. Now I know, because I measured this earlier, that my block, where are you? My block is 15.25. Bomb, 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 the whole world has ended. Sorry, I'm being facetious, forgive me. Oh, I'm using the wrong colour panel, that's why. I was wondering why my white was so different. So, this is 15.25. That's really annoying. It's meant to be 15.25. So I'm going to cut another piece of fabric. Now, what I've loved about the social media side of things is watching how everybody has done different things. And one of the nicest things I've seen, I don't know whether this was on the social media page or somebody actually sent it to me, what they did was they didn't want to make such a big quilt. So what they did was they actually made a much smaller quilt using just 6 of the panels and 6 of the blocks. And what they did then was that they just bought the 6 blocks that they wanted, and they have made a lovely little quilt from that, which I love. I think that's such a nice way of doing it because it's so unique to them and what they want to do, which I loved. Now what I would say, when you are cutting these out, I would actually just draw a little plan first of how you're going to cut your white fabric out, because I know us quilters, we want as much fabric out as we can possibly get out of this. So what I would suggest is lay your fabric number 1 out and just put a rough idea, using paper if needs be, what the best way of cutting it out is, because I've just cut that and I've realized I've actually not done it very well. And I think if you cut a couple this way and then cut a whole load that way, I think you're going to be able to get the best use of your fabric out of that. Where have I put my, there we go. So we're going to pretend that this is 15 1/4 and that these are 15 1/2. And what you're going to see is that my block is much smaller than my sashing. So when I come to sew this, it depends how big it is and how big your difference is. If you're more than 1/4 inch, I would actually say cut your sashing down. If you are more than 1/4 inch or more than 1/2 inch, I would actually say to you potentially remake the block, unless you've got a whole row of them the same. But what I would do is you would just move your sashing ever so slightly up. So the difference, you've got half the difference here and you've got half the difference there. Okay? Then what I would do is I'd put those on top of each other. So there are 2 ways of doing it. You can either do that where you've got half the difference there and half the difference there, or you can start on one end, and this is the way I do it, but I don't make very flat quilts. So this is just, I'm going to show you the technique. It's not, it definitely is frowned upon by many people who are more experienced than I am, because I've done a lot of fudging. And I won't deny the quilt we made for Her Majesty the Queen for her 90th, there was a little bit of what I'm about to show you, which is why the quilt looks so awful. It didn't look awful, but you know what I mean. So what I'm doing here is I'm lining up my sashing over here perfectly, right? And I'm going to start, and I've got my 1/4 inch seam perfect. And then once I've done that, I get my needle down, so it's in the down position. Can we turn the aircon off? Yeah. Thank you. It's very, very cold in here all of a sudden. So what you do next is you then line this bit up on the very edge over here. So I line the edge up over here as well. So I've got this lined up perfectly. And then when you do that, you've got this little ripple of your fabric all the way in. And this is where you become a little bit of a stretcher, I like to call it. So what I do is I hold that, and I know that's lined up, then I get the middle section and I line the middle section up, and I'll have a tiny little lip in the fabric that I know that I've got to ease in. So the great thing with sewing machines is the piece that's on the bottom, because the feed dogs are pulling the fabric through, if you put a little bit of tension on this top piece, the fabric's being pulled in a little more on the bottom than it is on the top. So in order to do that, you can actually lose 1/4 inch along 15 inches very, very comfortably. I do not recommend this as a usual practice, but if you're trying to hide 1/4 inch or 3/8 inch, you can easily do this, but you will end up with ripples in your fabric. But it's, you know, it's that balancing act of what do you do that's best for you. And I just keep it going. I keep that lined up. I then pull the top bit up, pull the bottom, and then let the feed dogs suck in some of that difference. And, oh, I've done it. So now, oh, what I've done, you can see I've got a ripple there. So if anybody ever gets a ripple there, the reason is, you can see on this side it's perfectly flat, but over here you've got that tiny little ripple. If I'd been very ambitious there by getting all the ripple in the first little stretch, which makes a very obvious ripple, but if you then, and you can see the rest is very flat, but if I'd eased that in the whole way down that quilt edge, it would have eased in perfectly. So you're kind of aiming to make sure that you ease it in over the whole length of the block. And when you push that out, you do that, set your seam, and then you just roll that over if you want to, or press it open, whichever's easiest for you. But once I've steamed it and pressed it, can you see that ripple? Now be honest, can you really not, can you see the ripple or not? Oh, the iron is spitting out water. So if I put this back on the dark board, you can't really see that ripple. So my 15 1/4 inch block fits perfectly into my 15 1/2 inch seam. Obviously the width is different, check the pattern. And on the back, you can only see a tiny little bit of that ripple to do it. So it's just, that's one of the things, all the classes that I've ever done, I've never ended up being shown how to do that. So I know that that's something that I've never known how to do, and I figured it out myself doing it that way with tons of YouTube research and watching other people the way they do it. So what I'll try and do now is I'm going to try and ease this in the whole way along the block. I don't then get it all in one little section. So I'm hoping for everybody who's got slight differences in their block, this will make it feel a little bit more achievable to get that corrected along the quilt. Because it's not something I want people to be upset about. Being 1/4 inch out doesn't mean your quilt block isn't lovely. It doesn't mean you don't love what you've done. It doesn't mean you haven't learned something new, a new skill. It just means that you're ever so slightly ways of potentially improving as you go along. But be kinder to yourself. Don't beat yourself up because you haven't got your 1/4 inch exactly right. Or when you were cutting, you were having a bad day that day and you cut maybe 1/8 inch smaller than you could have. It doesn't matter. This is to bring you joy and for you to be able to enjoy it. And I can assure you, it's probably a lot better than some of the things I've done at 2 in the morning. Now, that is exactly what I was looking for there. I'm hoping, there you go. So you see that ripple is all the way down. You can see I got it in over there, so it's a lot further down. But that's what you're looking for, is to pass that ripple all the way down, that it's not focused in one area. And I know that I'm definitely not going to win any awards for my easing in of my fabric section there, but I don't mind because I'm not doing it for an award. I'm doing it because it's for love and to be able to give something during this terrible time to somebody that I care about to enjoy. And you can see I have been able to get that in perfectly. And as I've pressed that, you can see there's no ripple on there at all. Where over here I've got a little bit of ripple at the beginning, whereas this one I've eased it out ever so slightly. So you can see over here you've got that little bit of a bow. And what you would do then is if your next block came along, I'm going to grab another one over here. Now this is not the correct order either. Please follow your pattern. As I put the next one in, if I'm easing it in to make it work, I do exactly the same thing. Otherwise, I just attach that perfectly and it works fine. So that is the way that I see that people can ease it. If your block is a little bit too big, if you've got a piece like this that has got no triangle points, and let's say this has come out at 16 inches, trim it down equally on all 4 sides. Don't hack off 1/2 inch there and there because your block's going to look weird. But if you cut 1/4 inch off all the way along there, if you're 1/2 inch too big all the way around, that's a nice way of doing it. It becomes more problematic when you have, gosh, I'm being very organized today, everything's everywhere. So it becomes a bit more problematic if you've got a block like this. Now, what I would suggest, this block I know is 15 1/2 that way and 15 1/4 that way. Let's say for you it was a different size. What you need to look at for these is being able to make sure that you hit, because you've spent so much time on it, and if you can, you're wanting to make sure that these are the points that you measure from. So if I take my ruler, oh, wrong one. If I take my ruler and I measure from that point, if I can get my ruler the right way around, from that point there to that point there, I can see that that's 14, I'm going to call it 15 inches. So I know that however I put my block together, that to that is 15 inches. So if this seam allowance is a little bigger and this seam allowance is a little smaller, it doesn't matter, because if I put my, knowing that that's 1/4 inch in there, if I line that up like that, as long as I hit that point there, it doesn't matter. And I've got more than enough seam allowance here to get rid of, to be able to make sure that I'm hitting that point there, which is what you're wanting to do. So you can easily put that down on there. There's nothing else to watch for. If you've made your block and you've got, say, 3/4 of an inch over here, you can trim this down by taking your ruler, lining up your 1/4 inch. In fact, I can do that right now. You can see I've got my 1/4 inch line at that triangle, my 1/4 inch line at that triangle, my 1/4 inch line at that triangle. So all I do now is I take this down and I do that, because I don't need that bit there. That's my 1/4 inch there. And if I do that on all 4 sides, I reckon that this block will actually work. Because that's the, oh, so you can see there I'm a little bit out. There we go. I love the fact I don't have to clean the floor. So there we go. And if I measure across there, oh, helps if I get the right side of the ruler. So now I'm down to 15 3/8. And I'm more than happy with that. And if I trim it on this side and I've got it 15 3/8, that's absolutely fine, because all I do is when I've got my 15.5 inch sashing to do, I'm going to easily be able to lose that 1/16 on this side and a 1/16 on this side. No one's even going to notice. So this is the way that I suggest you do it. If anybody has got any major problems, drop me a message. I'll try and help where I can. And I'm just hoping that that's going to have helped you on this whole process. And it doesn't matter if it's not perfect. We're not doing it for perfection. We're doing it to be able to enjoy it, love it, and to be able to share an experience together, to be able to have some fun. Now, at this point, you are going to have made your block and you're going to be wanting to do a little bit of binding. So with the kits that we've got, this is not going to come with enough fabric for your binding and your backing. But what I thought I would do is just give you a little bit of a tutorial on how to actually do your binding. Unfortunately, there isn't enough on there because it was just going to be too big a project to do. But don't forget, we've got some fabulous extra wide backing fabrics. So we've got some fabulous colours being able to do that. So just keep checking out the website, because there are some amazing colours that you can do. So I'm just going to do a little random bit of fabric testing for you here, just to give you an idea as to what you're doing once you put the quilt together. It's going to be very, very rough and ready. So your binding is going to be 2.5 inches wide. So that is the standard size most people use. Some people use 2 1/4. Some people have got binding machines on their beautiful feet on their machines to do. So you've got your 2 pieces. Now I always do this, but you can do them as the side, you can do them at diagonal. And what I do is I leave my position of my needle in the middle of my machine. And what I'm aiming to do is you're going to do a little press line on your top piece of fabric. And I'm aiming, because of course now I've moved it, you want that point there and that point there to touch your background fabric, and then you're going to sew on that little line as you go down. Now remember, please be kind. I am on live television. What the chances of this matching is very slim. Oh, that wasn't too bad actually. What's going on here? There we go. There was a bit of thread caught there. So at that point, once I've got that in, before you cut it, turn your fabric back and check that it's right. And when it's not right, it normally means you've stitched it either the wrong way round or you've got it a little bit, something's gone a bit awry. Then what I do is I cut 1/4 inch from your seam line and I trim off my dog ears, and these I freehand it. And there we go, that's you done. But now to make the binding, there are different arguments about this. I've seen so many comments about long armers preferred to the left or pressing your seams one way or the other. You do what works for you. Your long armor will make it work. Right, so I press my seam open, that's ready to go. And now to make the binding, you do that for as many pieces as you need. Then what you do is once you've joined all your pieces together, you're going to then press your fabric in half, or as close to half as you can get on national television. Wide, there we go. So you can see I didn't quite catch that. So you can, there we go. So you're going to press that in half all the way along. So the way I do it is I get it across my ironing board and I let it drop on the floor, and then I wind it back up afterwards. It just makes that there's no twists in your binding, because you can imagine when you're doing 600 inches of binding in one go. I think the biggest piece of binding I ever did in one go was 4,000 inches. I cut up about 4 meters of fabric in one go and just kept going. So you drop it all on the floor, and then when you finish, you just then start it like this, and I just feed it like that. So I end up with a massive ball of binding ready to go there. So now I have got somewhere around here 2 random pieces of fabric. Now we obviously have just used, you will use your quilt and your backing. I am just using 2 small pieces here. And your backing, now if you are going to a long armour, your backing normally needs to be at least 3 inches bigger than your front. If you're quilting it at home yourself, you must decide how you do it. I always like my binding to be a little bit, my backing to be bigger. You do what works best for you. I am using the 80/20 Hobbs crib size 80/20 wadding. But we've got loads of wadding on our website now, so do have a little check for that as to what we've got. Forgive me, sorry. I'm a bit conscious of time. So that's why I'm throwing it on the floor. So we're going to say this is our front, that's our back. So I put my back on the back. You also then are going to use this fabulous 505 spray. So the 505 spray, what I prefer to do is I don't spray onto my back, I spray onto my wadding. I'm in an enclosed area, so we're going to pretend. I then take my back and I put the back. And the easiest way I find is I start on one end and then I smooth from the central line out, because anybody who's used 505 spray before knows that you can end up with bubbles. So then you just smooth it all the way out. You then turn it round. Wonderful demo again. Are you listening? Got to have the can in my hand even if we're pretending. So I'm spraying 505 onto my wadding now, and I always do my wadding because I think that the wadding holds the glue a little better. And exactly the same, I start in the middle and I work out and go out that way to get as many of the little air bubbles that you can possibly have come out. And then I use my fabulous curved safety pins. Oh, and I've just stabbed myself on one. So be careful when you do them, because they do pop open in the little box for you. And then what I do with these is I pop these every sort of 2-3 inches into a little square. And the great thing about these pins is because it's got that curve in it, when you actually put the fabric through it, the fabric is still completely flat. Whereas if you used a normal safety pin, you wouldn't actually end up with a flat fabric. You would end up with the safety pin moving and manipulating the fabric as you go. I'm not going to put a huge amount of these in. I'm just going to put 3 of them in because it's not a huge amount of fabric. Almost stabbed my finger again there, doing really well. So there are 2 different sizes of these. I'm using the 38mm, which are a bit bigger. We also double check the website for curved safety pins. We've got a 27mm one as well. Now to quilt this, you would just put this through the machine. Now, it does work better with a walking foot, so all I'm doing is I'm just sewing very simply, or shall I say I am technically quilting at the moment. Now, when you are quilting and you are using a walking foot, one of my top tips, especially if you want to turn a corner, leave your needle down, drop your foot, lift your foot up. Once you rotate the fabric around, then just drop the foot again. We're not going to go too much into quilting, but I just wanted to give you a very, very quick demo once you've got your quilt made. And it gives you ideas of different ways of doing it. Oh, I'm about to hit a safety pin. Don't want to be doing that. Now, this machine doesn't come with a walking foot as a standard feature like some of the machines do, so you can get them separately. I'm going to take this out because I placed that very badly. There we go, and you can tell because I haven't used a walking foot, I now have a lovely pleat over there. So pleat and all, I am now done. I take my safety pins out. So you're going to do all your quilting and everything as you find necessary, and then you're going to trim your quilt up. Now, you would do this only once you finish quilting and you're completely happy with it. I would then trim this up. Now, I'm very lucky. I've got a massive studio, so I've got a huge area that I can put this all on. So I always get the longest ruler you can possibly fit into your studio. It just makes your life that little bit easier having the largest ruler you can. So there is your finished quilt. I know, it's miniature. Can you imagine that's your finished quilt? So now you're going to do your binding. Now, binding, I always find you've got to overlap it at some point. So I always try and do my overlap at the bottom. So what you're going to do now is I'm going to go, my binding is going to go all the way down here, and then around there, and around there, and around there. Hopefully this won't take too long to show you, but let me show you where you are. You're going to be sewing a full 1/4 inch at this point. I'm hoping I've got enough binding to go all the way around this. Didn't really measure this out beforehand. Probably don't, but there we go. Now I always use my 1/4 inch placement here. I just realized I didn't do that there. But the very first stitch I do on my binding, I always do a locking stitch. The reason being, especially when you're going to be manipulating this to join it, I want to make sure that it's tied down and I'm not going to pull those threads out. I then make sure I get, so I am now as close to 1/4 inch to the edge of my corner as I can be. I rotate my point so that I've got that my needle is now down there, and I'm going to stitch off to try and come through that corner over here. Hopefully I've got that, and I have. So you can see over here what I've done is I've stitched to the 1/4 inch, and then I've stitched all the way down, coming down here. I think you can just see that there. Perfect. So what I'm doing now is I'm folding this back here so that I'm following the line over there, and then I'm folding this back so that that fold lines up with this piece of the fabric there. And now I'm going to stitch from off the fabric right the way along. And I'm going to do that for all 4 of my corners. Until I get to the very edge, and exactly the same thing. Whoops, I've gone a little far. There we go. Put my needle down. So I've done exactly the same thing again, folding that back so that this line follows along. Whoops, there we go. So this line follows along all that way. Hold that down, and you do that. Have I got 3 more minutes for this? Oh, brilliant. Then I can show you. Now don't forget, we've got some fabulous extra wide backings on the website at the moment. I think the Crossroads one has definitely been a really, really good colour match we used for the blue and the brights combination. That red and the blue really, really were good. Okay, and now I'm doing my second last corner. And then comes the tricky bit, is joining these two together. So I don't have a huge amount of room with this. Don't normally make mug rug size quilts. So and that's moved. So I'm going to stitch about a ½ inch on here, only because, right, so I'm going to stitch ½ inch and then I'm doing a locking stitch again, and you'll see why in a few seconds. Right. So I now need to join these two together. So I do my locking stitch there and there because I've got to do quite a lot of fabric manipulation here. So this piece I'm going to leave as my long bit, and I'm going to measure 2½ inches over here. Now there are two ways you can do this. I have a 2½ inch ruler that I am lucky enough to be able to put there, and then I trim off. Or what I do over here is I mark my fabric at that 2½ inch piece. So I just triple check the measurement over there. That's 2½ inches. And I mark it with that press there. And then what I do is I fold this back, and I fold this back until I get to that 2½ inch line. And then again, I double check that I've got the right measurement. So you can see my fabric is now lined up with that pressed line that I've cut over there. And then I trim this off. This is the point normally where I cut it too big or too short and I have to rebind the whole quilt, where I burst into tears and swear never to quilt ever again. Don't worry, that's completely normal. Now, I don't use pins. I hate pins. Use a pin, and I'll tell you why once I find one. There we go. And it's really important that you do this because the number of times I have sewn this and I've done it completely wrong, and I've had to unpick the blasted thing, and of course then everything's on the bias, and then I'm crying, and then I'm doing it with gin and tonics coming out of everywhere. What you're looking to do is to check, once you've got the pin in, that you're actually going to sew on the right way to be able to do this. Now what does that mean? Now normally you would not be doing something so tiny, so we're just going to pretend I'm doing this as neatly as possible. Brilliant. Now I move my needle to the 1/4 inch. I don't know if this is going to work. No, I've done this wrong. Sorry, I'm getting flustered now. Right. And of course, because I've used a locking stitch, this is going to be a lot more difficult, but I'm pulling this out because it's not enough room. And normally you want to leave about 10 to 12 inches worth of space for you to do this comfortably. But I'm not going to mess this up. Live on air, where everybody will be going to say, that's why Sylvia does all your binding for you. Right. Put my pin in. Check that that's right, and it's not. This is why we check. So I'm just hearing our block of the week bundles are not on the web at the moment, so you might need to do a little search for a code. So if having watched this and you're very interested to do it, we will give you the code in a minute or two. I'm so glad you can all bear with us during these times. We're obviously all social distancing, and our web team is working so hard building our new website, etc. Things do sometimes go a little bit awry. We're all just so grateful that you can bear with us during these times. Please have worked, please have worked, please have worked. Oh, blast. I've got a pleat. Oh, well, you're going to forgive me for a pleat, aren't you? So there we go. What you've got left over is the bits that you don't need. Cut off. Now, my top tip, check what you're cutting off 5 or 6 times before you cut it off, because I've cut through this join 2 or 3 times before. So then what you do, you won't have a pleat. Yours will be perfect. And you just go back to this section here and you just stitch all the way down. I'm annoyed I've got that pleat now. We're going to pretend that this looks perfect because you won't be doing your binding so quickly on live telly. So at that point, you've got your binding stitched down. This is where your wonder clips, and you've heard me go on about these wonder clips and how much I absolutely adore them. What you do next is you fold your binding. If you're doing a single binding, I'll do the single binding first. You then take these fabulous wonder clips and you can then hold the whole process into place. I put them every 2 inches, 1.5 inches, 2 inches. Sylvia doesn't like them closer than that. She gets very cross when I refer to her binding on air, bless her. But she does so much of it. I love it. And she's so good at it as well. I kept saying, I could hire your services out. Shall we do that? And she's like, shh, shh. Now that's a single binding because you don't have any double folds. If you're doing a double fold, what you do is you fold your binding into the middle there, then you roll that over, and that's your double binding. Then you pop that on here, and you just follow that all the way down. Now the double binding, I put the wonder clips closer together, just because I think it holds it a lot more neatly. And then when you get to the edge, you've got to do a little bit of finagling. I love that word. Somebody actually used that word with me the other day. I was doing a retreat and they'd heard me say it on air and they're like, excuse me while I finagle my work now. So you get your double fold there. You plop that on there and you just keep going round. And then what you can do is you hand stitch all of those along. So in my studio, that would be a case of, Sylvia, fix it. And she would do it. Otherwise, if you want to machine sew it down, you literally just put it under your machine, going from the front in the stitch line between where your binding joins your fabric, and then you can stitch it all the way down there, because a lot of people do have problems with their hands. So that's my very, very short, very, very quick binding tutorial on how to do that. So let's just recap what we have got for you today. So the first thing we've got is our sashing and border bundles. Now, you've all seen me cut up the vintage one. So we're just going to imagine what that looked like, because I showed that to you at the beginning of the hour. So we've got the sashing and border panel for the vintage. And then we've got the wonderful set of instructions available for that as well. Just move all of these out of the way. Oh, I'm going to disconnect my iron. Hang on 30 seconds, because I did this last time, nearly set fire to the set. Never a good plan. So that's our vintage bundle that we're getting there, and the instructions available as well. That's $24.99 today, and remember, you're getting so much more fabric than you have in the previous weeks. So that is the vintage colorway there. Next, we've got our blues colorway, I think this is. We're going to pretend this is the blues colorway, because that's the same blue in the brights colorway. So this is the blue colorway. You're getting this fabulous huge panel there, as well as a set of instructions. And then last but certainly not least, you're going to get a set of instructions and the brights colorway. And that's enough then to do your sashings and your borders on that. If you haven't got a bundle yet and you are keen to take part in this quilt, we've also got bundles numbers 1 to 12 available in all 3 colorways. We're going to start with, we can do vintage first? Perfect, so we're going to do the vintage one. So if you wanted to get blocks 1 to 12 in the bundle, that's absolutely great. Don't forget, you're going to need to get your sashings and borders panels separately. Now available at the moment, I've always got to get this right. So that's the code you're going to type in right there. IWXC57 is the code you're going to type in. It does pop up when you type in. The web's just having a bit of a moment this morning, so bear with us. Within an hour, it'll be back up again. So that's blocks 1 to 12 in the vintage. And if you want to get blocks in the blue, which is our lovely colourway over here, that then is also available on the web. But again, you're going to have to search. It's this code that I've got right here, which is X for X-ray, S for Sierra, X for X-ray, C for Charlie, 98. That'll be blocks 1 to 12. And don't forget, you're going to need to get your borders and sashing panel as well as that. And then last but not least, we've got our lovely brights colour combination over here. That one is available also blocks 1 to 12. The code that you're looking for is just there. H for hotel, I for indigo, X for X-ray, C for Charlie, 46. And again, you'll need to get the sashings and border bundle with that. Thank you so much for bearing with me. We've run a little bit over this hour. We've got Jane Greenoff back for another hour. I'm very excited. I can't wait to see what she's got next. We're going to do the set now. See you in a few minutes.